Google, in its marketing, portrays itself as some great new big tech corporation that is bringing us into the future. They claim to have created all this technology. I mean, they really didn't create much technology. All they did is help spearhead mass surveillance. And they helped spearhead mass surveillance in this kind of brave new world, dystopian mass surveillance state in which Google sees all of our interactions, all of our communications. They did so not being independent. They did so being a contractor for the U.S. government. Google is a U.S. military contractor. Google is a CIA contractor. Google is a contractor for many police departments in the United States, and they use Google to spy on people. So Google is part and parcel of the U.S. military industrial complex. There is no point at which Google ends and the U.S. deep state begins. They are inextricably one and the same. Google is the U.S. deep state. Google is the U.S. national security state. Now, it's partially privatized, like many parts of the state, especially since the rise of neoliberalism, because neoliberal ideology says that the most so-called efficient way to administer state affairs is to privatize things. So the U.S. also has a degree of plausible deniability, but these outsourced corporations like Google, they are not independent. They are for-profit corporations, yes, but they are part and parcel of the U.S. government, and they are U.S. military contractors. We saw this. We saw a reminder of this. We see a reminder of this very frequently, every year or so, but we saw a reminder of this in an article that was just published at the New York Times. Here is the New York Times. Google executives told employees last week, this was November 15th, in a company-wide meeting that it is interested in a Pentagon contract for cloud computing and that working for the military would not necessarily conflict with the company's principles. Obviously, because Google has been a U.S. military contractor for many years. Now, briefly, I'm going to look over this article at the New York Times, the New York Crimes. Here it is. Google executives tell employees it can compete for Pentagon contracts without violating its principles. From November 15th. Google executives told employees last week in a company-wide meeting that it is interested in a Pentagon contract for cloud computing and that working for the military would not necessarily conflict with principles created by the company for how its artificial intelligence technology would be used. Now, again, this is the New York Times, which is always just U.S. government propaganda, so they're whitewashing all of this. As we'll talk about in a few minutes after this, Google has been a U.S. military contractor for many years. This is not new. But they talk about how Google is now pursuing a new contract 3 years after an employee revolt forced the company to abandon work on a Pentagon program that used artificial intelligence and to establish new guidelines against using AI weapons or surveillance. Now, what they're talking about here is there were protests at Google because they were using AI technology. The U.S. military was using AI technology at Google to kill people, to create weapons for the Pentagon and drone technology. That was a bridge too far for them, even though, again, Google has been a U.S. military contractor for many years, as I'll show. So the rush to pursue the contract is a so-called dramatic shift for Google. Again, propaganda from the New York Crimes. It's not a dramatic shift, which said in 2018 that it would not bid on a major cloud computing contract with the Defense Department because the work would conflict with its AI principles. Again, more propaganda. The so-called JEDI cloud computing contract, that is Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, was estimated to be worth $10 billion over 10 years. And instead, it was awarded to, drumroll, Microsoft. But facing legal challenges from Amazon, the Pentagon scrapped the contract in July and announced a new plan. So we see that Microsoft, like Google, is another part of the U.S. deep state, the U.S. national security state. They're inextricable. But let's go back here to the brief history of Google's work. I pointed out in this tweet, in response to this New York Crimes tweet, that Google is a CIA and Pentagon contractor and a key part of the U.S. war machine. And this has been known for a long time. Specifically, journalist Yasha Levine, one of the best investigative journalists in the U.S., really one of the few of us left, the few North American investigative journalists left. I said he's documented Silicon Valley's incestuous relationship with the U.S. military, spies, and cops for many years. And specifically, I'm going to look at a book that Yasha Levine published, which is a brilliant book. It's mandatory reading. Everyone needs to read this book. It's called Surveillance Valley, The Secret Military History of the Internet by Yasha Levine. And Yasha, briefly, he summarizes his book. He unearths the true story of the Internet. It was built by the U.S. government to spy on citizens at home and abroad. He traces the history of the Internet back to its beginnings as a Vietnam-era tool for spying on communist guerrilla fighters and anti-war protesters. The Internet was created as a weapon by the Pentagon, by the U.S. deep state, as a weapon against communism, as a weapon against socialist revolutionary movements like the National Liberation Front in Vietnam. That was the first use of it, to spy on Vietnamese revolutionaries defending their country from a genocidal war waged by the U.S. empire. So Yasha Levine in his book shows how the same military objectives, that is the Cold War anti-communist objectives, that drove the development of early internet technology is still at the heart of Silicon Valley today. Spies, counterinsurgency campaigns, hippie entrepreneurs, privacy apps funded by the CIA. From the 1960s to the 2010s, this revelatory and sweeping story will make you reconsider what you know about the most powerful, ubiquitous tool ever created. So that's the blurb for his book. I'm going to read a little brief passage from his book, summarizing an important part. Again, this is mandatory reading. I would highly recommend everyone check out Surveillance Valley. But this is an excerpt of the book that was published over at the Baffler. He just called it Surveillance Valley. Why are internet companies like Google in bed with cops and spies? Now, here is a really important part. He begins this talking about how Google is being used by police in California to spy on people. But that was what piqued his interest in this topic, is learning that Google was working with Oakland police, and they had a surveillance center spying on activists in Oakland, activists against police brutality, activists against racism, activists against gentrification. But as he did research, he discovered, I'm going to read briefly from, this is an excerpt from Yasha Levine's book. Google is one of the wealthiest and most powerful corporations in the world, yet it presents itself as one of the good guys. Don't forget that one of its old slogan, it's no longer its slogan, by the way. Its old slogan was "Don't be evil." And yet, I traced the story and dug into the details of Google's government contracting business. Yasha Levine writes, I discovered that the company was already a full-fledged military contractor, selling versions of its consumer data mining and analysis technology to police departments, city governments, and just about every major U.S. intelligence and military agency. Now, Yasha published this book back in 2017. So this book is several years old. So this story from the New York Times, the New York Crimes, acting as though this new contract that Google is pursuing with the Pentagon, it acts as though this is news. This is not news. So again, Yasha was writing this back in 2017, and he's saying these are contracts that are even before that. Over the years, Google has supplied mapping technology used by the U.S. Army in Iraq. So it is not in any way hyperbole to say that Google is a U.S. military contractor and a war profiteer that profited off of the war in Iraq. One of the most criminal acts of this century, of the 21st century, the invasion of Iraq that led to 1 million people. Well, Google profited from that war as a contractor for the U.S. Army. Furthermore, Google hosted data for the CIA. So Google is a CIA contractor. Put a pin in that. We'll come back to that in a second. Google still today is a CIA contractor. Google indexed the NSA's vast intelligence databases. So Google helps to spy on us hand in hand with the NSA. Not only does Google spy on us in terms of all of our emails, in terms of our other communications, in terms of our devices, but Google actually is a contractor for the NSA, the largest mass surveillance contractor, or mass surveillance institution in the world. Now, Google also built military robots and co-launched a spy satellite with the Pentagon. So again, Google's contracts with the US military are not New York crimes. Google also leased its cloud computing platform to help police departments predict crime. This is like Minority Report kind of stuff. We're talking about dystopian science fiction, and Google has been part of this with US police departments and the CIA and the Pentagon. And importantly, I want to point out, I'm talking about how evil Google is here in this video, but we should keep in mind that it's not just Google. As Yasha points out, Google is not alone. From Amazon to eBay to Facebook, most of the internet companies we use today, every day, have also grown into powerful corporations that track and profile their users while pursuing partnerships and business relationships with major US military and intelligence agencies. Some parts of these big tech Silicon Valley corporations are so thoroughly intertwined with the US government's security services that it's hard to tell where they end and the US government begins. Again, I can't recommend that book from Yasha Levine enough. It really changed the way I see Silicon Valley in a way that has stuck with me. Brilliant book. But now I want to look briefly at something, at a press release that came out from this website, NextGov, which is a website focused on U.S. government contracts. This is from November 2020. This is basically just a glorified press release. It's titled, CIA Awards Secret Multi-Billion-Dollar Cloud Contract. This is exactly a year ago, November 2020. The CIA has awarded a cloud contract to bring foundational cloud services from multiple cloud service providers into the intelligence community. Now, who are those providers? The opening line here. The CIA has awarded its long-awaited commercial cloud enterprises, or C2E contract, to 5 companies. Drumroll: Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, Google, Oracle, and IBM. So here we see Amazon, Microsoft, Google, IBM, also Oracle. So especially Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, 3 of the biggest corporations on Earth. Amazon, owned by the richest man on Earth, Jeff Bezos, who is a 200 billionaire and now is also the owner of the Washington Post. So the owner of the Washington Post, the owner of Google, Jeff Bezos, has a massive cloud computing contract with the CIA. Of course, Microsoft, of Bill Gates fame, one of the other richest people on Earth, and Google. So they're all CIA contractors. It could be worth tens of billions of dollars over the next decade and a half. The CIA did not disclose the expected value, but it could be worth tens of billions of dollars. Now, here is a quote from a CIA spokesperson. We are excited to work with the multiple industry partners in this cloud service contract. Now, here are some quotes from Amazon. This is Amazon Web Services. A spokesperson from Amazon said, quote, "We are honored to continue to support the intelligence community, that is, U.S. spies and coup plotters and torturers, as they expand their transformational use of cloud computing. Together, we're building innovative solutions across all classification levels and allow for missions to be performed faster and more securely. Thank you, Amazon. Thank you, Jeff Bezos. Now the CIA can help organize fascist coups d'etat in Latin America against progressive governments thanks to Amazon and Jeff Bezos." Here's a Microsoft statement. "We appreciate that the government has chosen Microsoft not just the government, the CIA has chosen Microsoft and are eager to serve as an integral partner in supporting its overall mission. We look forward to providing the intelligence community our latest unique and differentiated cloud and productive Azure cloud and productive capabilities. So Microsoft and Amazon are very excited to work with the CIA to help them in their coup plotting spying operations. IBM also very proud to further its collaboration with the CIA. Oracle as well. And finally, here's a Google spokesperson said in a statement, "We're proud to have been named a vendor for the CIA's Commercial Cloud Enterprise Contract C2E, ensuring that agencies aren't locked into any single vendor and are able to ensure capacity, redundancy, and best of breed cloud solutions." You couldn't even tell if you listen to this. You couldn't even tell they're talking about an organization that is basically organized crime, the CIA, overseen by the state, that props up fascist coups, plans fascist coups and props up fascist dictators, that murder and torture and disappear activists and human rights supporters. We remain committed to serving public sector organizations of all sizes. And here we go. Google boasts about its contract with the U.S. Department of Energy, the Defense Innovation Unit, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and the U.S. Small Business Administration, among others. So here in this statement, Google is also boasting of having contracts with the U.S. military, the Navy specifically, the Pentagon, and the Department of Energy. So where does Google begin and where does the U.S. government end? At no point. They are one and the same. Google is part of the U.S. deep state. It's part of the U.S. national security state. And yes, they're going to have another contract with the Pentagon very soon, likely. It's very likely. But that's what Google is. Silicon Valley, as Yasha Levine said, is surveillance valley. It is part and parcel of the U.S. deep state, the U.S. national security state, the CIA, the FBI, the Pentagon, and all of the lovely police departments that brutalize people at home in the United States. They spy on them abroad and organize coups abroad, and at home they brutalize protesters, throw them in prison, and kill them. They shoot them in the streets. Thanks to Silicon Valley. Thanks, Google.